Yes,
Okay.
it says that it's being live streamed so that we can be here with all of our friends who are on Facebook and YouTube. So welcome everyone as we get ready to dive into this week's Torah portion, which is ending the book of Genesis. Somehow we've gotten through the entire thing, or we will at least by the end of this week. But before we can dive into our Torah portion, I want to invite everyone to join with me in saying our blessing. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav ve'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah Hafok ba la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai-dai. 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 Yada-dai-dai-dai-dai. Okay, so if you had a chance to look at the Musar Torah commentary, then you know that this portion that we're talking about relates to emet, truth. Several weeks ago, there was another Torah portion that also related to truth. So some of this, obviously, it's coming from a different angle, but it's the same midah, it's the same soul trait. So I invite you to bring in what you remember from that past Torah study as well. But really, the best way to start all of this is just by diving straight into text. So let me share the screen with all of you. Okay, can everyone see this?
Yes. Okay.
Okay, great. So I want us just to begin. This is towards the very beginning of this week's portion. Essentially, the portion Vayechi, it means and he lived. And in much the same way the Chaye Sarah, it says like the life of Sarah, but it really is talking about her death and what happens after her death. This Torah portion that means and he lived is talking about the end of Jacob's life, and he dies within this portion. But one of the big things that happens is that all of the sons are gathered around him as he offers final blessings for the Jewish people, final blessings for his sons, at least. We don't know about his daughter, but we do hear about the blessing for his sons. There's an interesting piece in the women's commentary about, hey, what about Dina? What happened to her? Why isn't she getting some blessings here? But that's another story. Right now, I just want to dive into some of these blessings that Jacob gives over his children. So would anyone like to read these aloud?
I can read it.
Thank you, Ray.
And Jacob called his sons and said, "Come together that I may tell you what is to befall you in days to come. Assemble and hearken, O sons of Jacob. Hearken to Israel your father. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might and first fruit of my vigor, exceeding in rank and exceeding in honor. Unstable as water, you shall excel no longer. For when you mounted your father's bed, you brought disgrace, my couch he mounted. Simeon and Levi are a pair. Their weapons are tools of lawlessness. Let not my person be included in their counsel. Let not my being be counted in their assembly. For when angry, they slay men, and when pleased, they maim oxen. Cursed be their anger so fierce, and their wrath so relentless. I will divide them in Jacob, scatter them in Israel." That's all I can see.
Yeah, that's that entire piece. Okay, so these are the blessings over some of the firstborn sons. And I don't know, very often, and within our portion too, there are times where it refers to this as a blessing. And yet, reading these words, we might question to ourselves where the blessing is in the blessing, right? There's a lot of very strong language that is being used in here. So any particular things kind of stand out to you or have questions about before we look at some of the other blessings that come shortly thereafter?
What does he mean when he said, when you mounted your father's bed?
Yeah, there was this whole story about how like Reuben, how he might have actually, like Jacob wasn't quite married to, I think it was Bilhah. And there's a story within the tradition how Reuben might have been with her as well. And that was a big no-no.
Gotcha.
Anything else kind of strike out or
certainly shows that Jacob has not forgotten a thing. Nothing. Quite a memory.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing too, right? Because within the portion, it says Jacob is losing his vision. It says Jacob is like, maybe he's not quite his full self. Joseph makes a supposition that because he is blessing sons in an atypical way, that clearly he's kind of lost his like ability to really know what's going on. But if you read these blessings, Jacob is very much with it. There is not a thing here that he is missed or that he is losing.
Excuse me. So what is the line? What does it mean when he says, I will divide them in Jacob?
That's a good question.
At the very bottom.
Yeah. Scatter them in Israel. Yeah, like separate them, basically. Like Simeon and Levi are a pair. They've done some things together that maybe aren't so great. And so this is saying that they'll be divided.
It's interesting that he uses his two names.
Yeah.
I would divide them in Jacob. So Jacob was the one who got into a lot of trouble, who was very scheming. So you can see where that would divide, or I can kind of see that, but scatter them in Israel almost has an overtone of lack of responsibility or lack of having any power within the God side, the religion side, the name given to Jacob by whoever it was that wrestled with him.
I was going to say that scheming and being devious is one thing, but these other brothers killed other men and maimed their beasts of burden, and did really maybe more terrible things than being devious and a trickster. Who knows? But and the passage and what is being said is about the truth, the emet of it. This is what they did.
Yeah, I mean, it's referring to things, right? Like this is written in a poetic form, so everything is kind of shortened.
Yeah.
But it's kind of Jacob saying, I see you. I see what you've done. I've seen these kind of things. Don't think these things are hidden from me.
It's like nowhere, no how are you going to be a leader, even tribally, or will you be one of the leaders of the religion either?
Because of the choices that you've made, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple more blessings that I just want to get to. And And I didn't include all of them. There's a lot of them. I just picked out some of the ones that are perhaps some of the most pointed. And this is certainly one of them, right? Don shall be a serpent by the road, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heel so that the rider is thrown backward. Not the most kind thing in the world to say about Don, right? And then we come to Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning, he consumes the foe, and in the evening, he divides the spoil.
But, ew.
That's weird to say that about Benjamin, who during his birth came when Rachel died, giving him birth. That's very strange. Rachel's his favorite wife and all. I don't understand that about Benjamin.
It's not necessarily all negative either, right? It's talking about his strength. It's interpreted in lots of different ways.
Yeah, Benjamin.
But yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Benjamin becomes with Judah, the remaining southern kingdom.
Yeah.
So it's very strange to say something negative about Benjamin.
So, I mean, let's think about this though. Now that we've read some of these blessings, and it goes on and on, it's a lot longer than this. But in what way could Jacob's words here be considered a blessing?
To me,
I think in the second and third pieces, that Benjamin is answering for Benjamin. Consuming the foe could also be that you defeat the enemy, that you protect the people. And in the evening, when you've defeated the enemy, there, to the victor go the spoils, that he doesn't keep them all to himself, that he spreads them within within the people that he lives with. Or I don't remember if he ever becomes the number one person, but that he doesn't keep it all for himself and his family.
Yeah, so we could understand this in a positive light. Yes, go ahead, Tom.
No, I was just going to say, after kind of, looking at the Musar stuff, I would say, what's the positive out of some of these sharp words? Maybe that he, maybe these, he's helping them kind of be more realistic of where they are in their lives. And if they're not in, as we are in life, it's hard to come to grips with, face the truth sometimes, right? So he's, for better or for worse, he's putting it all on the line and kind of saying, here's what you got going, here's what you got going, here's, and then you guys figure it out.
Yeah, the blessing of clarity. Any other thoughts on that? Comments for what Tom said? I mean, I think there's some really big questions that brings up. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I thought, hello?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I thought the same thing as Tom. I was going to say that by really laying it out there and telling them who they are, no misconceptions, and maybe they'll have a better clarity, and he places them where they need to be, and so that they could maximize whatever they do have, and also saying Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, to me, in a way, it's like a go-getter and a leader. So I don't see that as being so negative, in my opinion. This is what I see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's a lot of rabbis who absolutely 100% agree with that. You see, this is actually a very positive blessing right here.
Right.
Nonetheless, if we think about the blessings that we might give to our children, whether our actual children or metaphorically, these might not be the first kind of words that would come to mind. I'm venturing a guess, right?
Yeah, can you imagine being one of those men standing there and listening to your dying father give his last impression of you?
Yeah.
Woo.
Needs some thick skin.
Yeah, for sure. So I want to go into a couple of these commentaries because there's some big questions brought up by what you said, by what you said, Tom, around really where the blessing is in telling the truth, where the limits of that are, and where perhaps maybe sometimes, I don't know if there are ways that maybe this is teaching us the importance of truth in a way that could be embraced positively. One of the first texts I wanted to bring in is something from Mordechai Yosef of Ishbitz, who said, when Jacob wanted to bless his sons, he was unsure if he really needed to bless them on account of all the distress that they caused him. For it is taught, any scholar who does not avenge himself and bear a grudge like a serpent is no real scholar. That in itself is such an interesting quote, right? I don't know what to make of that personally. I just thought it was really interesting. Therefore, the text called, meaning crying out and yearning with all his heart that heaven should guide his heart and mind, and that God should place the right words, the blessing on his tongue. This is why the text does not initially say that Jacob blessed his sons, for he was not sure what he was going to say to them. So this idea that any scholar who doesn't avenge himself and bear a grudge like a serpent is no real scholar, that he needed to voice these. What do we make of that? Why would our tradition include a teaching of that kind?
Certainly not turn another cheek.
Does he refer to Joseph? Is it referring to Joseph, who did not take revenge on his brothers? Am I confusing something here?
You're not confusing anything.
Okay. So is he talking about, because Joseph actually protected his brothers when he could have taken revenge. So I'm not, then I don't understand, therefore, any scholar who does not avenge himself and bear a grudge like a serpent is no real scholar. Is he referring to Joseph?
He's not referring to Joseph. I mean, in a way he is, right? I think, what you brought up about Joseph is really, really important here, right? Joseph says to the brothers, don't feel bad. This was all God's plan. Like, this is how it was supposed to be. Don't be hard on yourself. It's okay.
Right.
And I think that this text here is a response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Tom, is there something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just was trying to clarify. So are you saying that this Talmud Yoma, is it saying that he needed to speak up and justifying, to speak in that way? Is that how you're reading that? Any scholar who does not avenge himself and bear a grudge like a serpent is no scholar.
Yeah, I mean, I think the wording here is far more harsh than perhaps it needs to be. But the underlying message that they think this is trying to get across is that, yes, it might be that this was the plan. It might be that in the end, this is what needed to happen if we go along with Joseph's reasoning and what's kind of taught through our past Torah portion. But at the same time, shouldn't people also be held accountable for what they do? Like, just to let them off the hook, is that really actually helpful? I think this is the pushback to it and say, no, people need to understand that what they did is wrong. It needs to be vocalized.
Yeah, for me, sorry, Michael, do you want to?
I was just going to say that decades ago, my parents taught me that, to have the courage of my convictions, using that expression, and maybe in a sense, if as a person interprets an issue as to what the truth of it is, to speak it, and that's what I believe. Maybe the statement means something about that. Saying it and if you believe in it strongly enough.
Right. Standing up for what you believe. rather than just throwing it out once and it gets shot down and you give up and you feel angry
And
or
how-
unheard.
yeah,
Sorry, I was just gonna say before I forget, my take on this is that whether, as in the Musar readings, whether and to what extent you're going to deliver that truth, it's a very subjective thing, as we've talked about before. How is that going to affect the other? There's no general rule. You have to give them the truth blindly and full force, or whatever you believe the truth is. I think it's a subjective, case by case basis, right? So maybe in that case, we weren't there. We don't have any of the context. That was what was called for. And that was, there's a balance. If you don't give the truth, maybe you're enabling. If you give too much truth, maybe you're causing a lot of, and they're not ready for it. You're causing a lot of damage, right? So you have, a lot of power with how you interact with somebody, and you have to consider and feel where they're at and judge that, right? That's just, and so this is just an example that we can learn from, the right way or the wrong way,
Yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Tom. I mean, if you remember several weeks ago when we talked about Emet, I had brought in the difference between Hillel and Shammai. And it was a case, and it was one in which one of our B'nai Mitzvah students actually spoke to a little bit as well when he became a bar mitzvah, that there was this, that when there's a bride, right? When someone is getting married, even if we don't believe the bride to be the most beautiful person in the world, shouldn't we say to that bride that she is the most beautiful person in the world on that day? And Shammai says, no, you never ever lie. Don't say anything if it's not true. And Hillel said, you have to tell her she's beautiful because she is on this day, right? And that there's the kind of going back and forth. Shammai is no, it's right and wrong. It's black and white. And Hillel said, people's needs are far more important. And that's some of what I think you're talking to, Tom.
And I think also in regards to what Tom is saying, I really agree with that, you judge based on the situation for the better good, look at the whole picture, in other words.
Sure.
So sometimes, avenging is not, you can still hold them accountable without being bitter and avenging.
Yeah, and that's why the wording here is pretty harsh and I don't think is necessarily the most helpful, but the underlying message of saying something that is true for the purpose of standing up for what is right, perhaps that piece is really needed here, right? So let's go a little bit further. This is actually straight out of the Musar Torah commentary that some of you read. Does anyone want to read these two paragraphs?
I'll do it.
Thank you, Larry.
For Jacob, a person who is often considered to have excelled in deceit, this brutal honesty and frank level of truth-telling appears to be out of character. However, to diminish his last words to his sons as an aberration, contrary to his lifelong reputation for deviousness, is to do Jacob a serious injustice. As we look back over Jacob's life, we see that he wrestles with the truth and its consequences far more frequently than he does with angels. At almost every stage of the saga, the truth causes Jacob's pain and suffering, either because of his own forthright honesty or because he listens to and believes someone he thinks is telling him the truth. Sorry.
If we look at in Alan Marinis's Everyday Holiness, he talks a lot about something that is actually commonly taught in Musar, which this idea that we all have kind of our own soul curriculum, that we have specific areas, every one of us, that are areas where there's room for growth. And if we don't really dive into them and wrestle with them and work on them, then they reappear in our lives again and again and again in lots of different forms. And so this teaching that Rabbi Brett is kind of offering here really speaks to that. He's been wrestling with this idea of truth, this idea of deceit, his entire life. And there are so many ways in which it comes up. And so it's not surprising that it continues to come up even on his deathbed, even as he's speaking his final words to his sons. So I want us to look at a couple of these different texts that he's speaking to. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Sandy.
I was thinking the name Israel actually has something to do itself with wrestling, which is very appropriate here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the wrestling with the angels, right? It's not just wrestling with the angels, it's also wrestling with this part of him. And the fact that we are all Yisrael is kind of a nod to the fact that all of us are wrestling with different things in our lives. And that doesn't have to be a negative, right? That could actually be a positive, but it is just a part of human nature. Thank you for bringing that in. Okay, so just a couple of texts just to refresh our memories about different times that there's either deviousness or a little bit of grappling with this idea of truth. The first one is in Genesis 25. Once when Jacob was cooking stew, Esau came in from the open, famished. And Esau said to Jacob, "Give me some of that red stuff to gulp down, for I'm famished," which is why he was named Edom, which means red. Jacob said, "First, tell me your birthright. Sell me your birthright." And Esau said, "I am at the point of death, so what use is my birthright to me?" Right? And not a little, but a whole lot dramatic right here, right? And Jacob said, "Swear to me first." So he swore to him and sold his birthright to Jacob. And Jacob then gave Esau bread and lentil stew. He ate and drank, and he rose and went away. Thus did Esau spurn the birthright. Now, there's not necessarily a lie going on here, but there is definitely playing into Esau's drama and taking advantage of him so as to get a birthright that was not meant for him. It was meant for his brother. A little bit of bending of tradition. The next instance that comes up, of course, is a really big one. And I think this is actually where we talked about Emmet the first time, was in this story. This is when Rebecca is talking to Jacob and trying to get Jacob to pretend to be Esau so that he will get the blessing of the firstborn instead of Esau, right? "So now, my son, listen carefully as I instruct you. Go to the flock, fetch me 2 choice kids, and I will make of them a dish for your father, such as he likes. Then take it to your father to eat in order that he might bless you before he dies." Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, "But my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I am smooth-skinned. If my father touches me, I shall appear to him as a trickster and bring upon myself a curse, not a blessing." But his mom said to him, "Your curse, my son, be upon me. Just do as I say and go fetch them for me." He got them and brought them to his mother, and his mother prepared a dish such as his father liked. Now, there's a whole lot more dishonesty in this text, right? It builds upon the last one. Jacob is not saying out loud, "No, this is wrong. I shouldn't be pretending to be my brother." He says, "But my brother is hairy. What if my father finds out?" So it definitely comes up in this case.
Actually, he doesn't say this is wrong. He just gives excuses why it won't work.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, right? He doesn't say this is wrong. He doesn't say I'm opposed to this. He just says we're going to have to work out these issues so that I don't get a curse because I don't want to be punished.
There was a problem, and I'll explain it to you when you're done with your program.
Okay, some background noise over there. Yeah, so this is really a young Jacob that's already kind of wrestling a lot. And then a little bit later, as he gets older, This is after Esau had threatened Jacob's life. Jacob had left. He was going to get married. He falls in love with Laban, not with Laban, with Laban's daughter, Rachel. Sorry, I'm looking at Laban right there and saying his name. And Laban says to Jacob, just because you're a kinsman, should you serve me for nothing? Tell me what your wages will be. Now, Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes. Rachel was shapely and beautiful. Jacob loved Rachel, so he answered, I will serve you 7 years for your younger daughter, Rachel. And Laban said, better that I give her to you than I should give her to an outsider. Stay with me. So Jacob served for 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed to him but a few days because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, give me my wife, for my time is fulfilled, that I may cohabit with her. And Laban gathered all the people of the place and made a feast. And when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and brought her to him, and he cohabited with her. Laban had given his maidservant Zilpah to his daughter Leah as maid. And when morning came, there was Leah. So he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? I was in your service for Rachel. Why did you deceive me? And Laban said, is it not the practice in our place to marry off the younger before the older? Wait until the bridal week of this one is over, and we will give you this one too, provided you serve me another 7 years. So in this text, Jacob has to deal with the deception of Laban. He was tricked. How do you think that changed him? Or did it?
I don't believe there was any text in there saying that it did change him. You have to kind of read that in.
I there's so much with this stuff that I just not kosher to me, literally. And it's on so many levels. But one thing I would point out is I don't know, and maybe I don't know what the writer is, what's the lesson at that time. This feels wrong to us today in 2021 on many levels, all these different things, right? Deceiving, deceptive. There seems to be no attempt to make things right, no learning from that. Obviously there was some stuff with Jacob, but and I just don't know if I'm struggling with the lesson is from the writer's standpoint, is it to see real world examples of what people do and how to learn, take away from that. We were human, we all make mistakes and we can learn from those mistakes. Or is it, when you see some of the mental gymnastics, kind of going on over the years in trying to justify, well, it could have meant this, and this is why this happened, or this was to make this, to rectify the earlier disservice that was done to him. I don't know. I'm rambling, but I guess I just wanted anything you had to say.
It's a really good question, Tom. I don't think anyone is looking at what Laban did here or what Jacob did to Esau and say, oh, this is the right thing to do. We should aspire to act this way in our day-to-day lives, right? They are definitely imperfect human beings. And sometimes the Torah teaches by positive example, and sometimes it teaches by negative example. Here, Jacob, the deceiver, is deceived. And since he had only ever been in a position where he was the one who was being deceptive, he had never before had an opportunity to experience what that felt like. And so here he is deceived and he has to actually deal with the consequences of that. But he does. He responds. He serves another 7 years. Yes, Steve, go ahead.
There is an interesting, I consider a tangential lesson here in that it does demonstrate the depth of love that he must have to be willing to subject himself to, in this case, 14 years to get this one woman. He must have an incredible depth of love that I find difficult to understand, frankly. But I don't think that's the main point of the whole story, but it does demonstrate that.
But that is an important component, right? Because being deceptive in a lot of ways has been about being self-serving. And now he is not acting in a self-serving way. Really, he's acting because of the love that he has for another human being. There is a growth there.
There's also a bit of a parallel between Jacob's actions as a young man and the actions of his sons, in the sense that when he was younger, he treated his brother kind of badly, stole his inheritance and stole his birthright through trickery and through his children, then later went to steal the favor and to sell off his son and to trick him into thinking that he had died somehow, or just that he suffered kind of what he forced on other people in the early part of his life.
I'd like to say something that, oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? Anyway, I'd like to say that, and maybe it's been said, but perhaps in current times, we're seeing that if or maybe we could see it in the story with the lying and deception here. I mean, where if lies are told enough, the person or people telling the lies, it becomes a truth for them. And so now that it's becoming, it's reversing on him, that he's seeing that that maybe not telling the truth at all times is wrong. I mean, it's
yeah, I think that's getting also to what Brian was saying, right?
Yeah,
like
that's
this
right.
idea that it has ramifications. When we act in a deceptive way,
That's right.
we cause pain, that ripple effect. And so here, when Jacob is actually subjected to it, he doesn't wrestle with the angel until after this happens. I don't think he could have, because he finally had something within himself where he was questioning some of what he did, but at the same time, he didn't fully work through it, because if he had, perhaps there wouldn't have been so much deception he was grappling with later in life and through his children. Another quote just bringing in here from Rabbi Isero. Jacob's failure to realize the consequences of his unmitigated honesty is manifest again in his clearly stated and obviously preferential love for Joseph. His action provokes a dangerous jealousy against Joseph, leading to the plot by his brothers to kill or otherwise dispose of him. And once again, Jacob is deceived by those he thought he could trust, his sons, who lie to him by feigning Joseph's death. Speaks to exactly what both of you were saying. So I want to bring us back, unless there's a comment. I don't want to interrupt or cut anyone off.
Well, these are all severe consequences and, punishments here. All this deceit. And Joseph is really, getting the consequences for, having lived that kind of a life. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot of learning lessons here.
Yeah, Larry, go ahead.
Oh, no, that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, this is definitely a text that is teaching us the consequences of being deceitful. Why one of our Torah commandments is talking about being honest, right? So I want to bring us back to this overall question that we had earlier on about kind of the balance between being truthful and being kind. And so Rabbi Cheryl Peretz speaks to this. So what was so important for them to hear? The criticism, their past mistakes, or perhaps what Jacob wanted them to hear was that despite the challenges they faced and the consequences of their actions, each was still part of the family, still welcome at his side. Furthermore, he wants them to know that each of them would be part of the new nation in formation. The past was not forgotten. Rather, it had become a part of who they were and where they stood. Regardless of what they had done in the past, they would remain part of the covenanted people and would continue to carry with them their strengths, their weaknesses, their experiences, and their witnesses. Jacob's blunt honesty is at once his own acceptance of each one and his vision of their future place in the ongoing destiny of our people. Then and only then could Jacob find the words to bless each of them with the blessing they needed. Then and only then could Jacob find the peace to face his creator. This idea, the only way they could truly move forward was by expressing truth. There's so often cases where people hold on to things and don't express things out loud. And then someone dies and they never actually had a chance to have the conversation. They never had the chance to work what it was through, and there's pain that comes with that too. And at the same time, this is on the other side of things. And Yevamot 65b, this is from the Talmud. Rabbi Ilya said, in the name of Rabbi Elazar, in the name of Rabbi Shimon, just as it is a mitzvah for a person to say that which will be heeded, so it is a mitzvah for a person not to say that which will not be heeded. One should not rebuke those who will be unreceptive to his message. As Rabbi Akiva said, or Rabbi Abba said, it is obligatory for him to refrain from speaking, as it is stated, do not reprove a scorner, lest he hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. So do you think that the brothers were actually able and actually would be able to heed the blessings that Jacob gave them?
Can you ask the question again?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, this text right here, this Talmud text says that we shouldn't say any words of criticism to someone who won't be able to heed them in a way that it will only be heard negatively and that there'll be nothing positive that comes out of it, right? So when we look at the blessings that Jacob offers all of his sons, are they said in a way where the sons actually can hear it and respond positively to them?
For me, it's just, it's subjective, right? I don't know them personally. And if they're thick-skinned kind of, ADD-ish guys, that may be what they need, right? Want right here, look at me. Here's what I'm telling you. This is what you have to work on. I've got to go. But I don't know.
It's really hard to know. The brothers they all have children themselves. They're old themselves. They probably have grandchildren as well. So you start to get into legacy. What is their legacy to their children? And maybe they're old enough, there's not a lot they can do about what they did 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Reading the words that we had in the beginning, I personally don't think they were constructive as they could have been. And maybe they could have, it's one thing to say the truth, but it also needs to be said in a way that from now on, please look at yourself and you can change and there is a way to improve. And I don't know if that was really related to them.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it is somewhat telling that nothing he says was kind about Levi, and later on they become quite important, obviously through spiritual and religious practices. So, yeah.
I remember being at my mother's bedside when she was dying, and I don't know if she told me the truth or not, but she said, I loved you. Well, I remember that. I took it strangely. It had a lot of meanings, but I was rather pleased she said that. If she had criticized me for something or say I disappointed her, it would have been devastating. It would have made my memories of her way different. I think it's important what's said when you're dying to your sons, very important. And it should not be negative. It should not be negative. I don't care if it's the truth or not.
Yeah, so I mean, there really is this debate going on, right? Because that moment, to hear only words of criticism from your father at that moment, as right before he dies, and then he dies, the conversation is over, right? That is such a hard blow for some of these boys who had lived very immorally. An argument could be said that these words of truth were really important to be vocalized. Should they have been vocalized on the deathbed? That's a totally different conversation that we certainly could have, but that they needed to be vocalized. But here also this component of, were they helpful? That's the piece that the Talmud brings in, that question that perhaps Jacob had not quite grasped at this point in his life.
You want to strike back. My mother said I did a bunch of stuff wrong. I don't care if she's lying. I would strike back and tell her, what about what you did? So it's not helpful to be criticized by your parent when they're dying. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, the timing isn't helpful for sure. There is this one other piece that's brought in this text. I split up the Talmud text in two so that I could bring reference to this verse toward the end of our Torah portion. So when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, the very end, they said, what if Joseph still bears a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrong that we did to him? They thought that maybe the reason that Joseph had been acting kindly to them was simply to placate Jacob. And now that Jacob was no longer alive, maybe now he'd retaliate, right? So the brothers, what do? They sent this message to Joseph before his death, meaning before Jacob's death. Your father left this instruction. So shall you say to Joseph, forgive, I urge you, the offense and guilt of your brothers who treated you so harshly. Therefore, please forgive the offense of the servants of God of your father. And Joseph was in tears as they spoke to him. Now, I want us to hold on to this as we look at this text from the Talmud that responds to that, because I believe that there is so much more going on here than meets the eye. So the Talmud, it says, Rabbi Elia further said in the name of Rabbi Eliezer, son of Rabbi Shimon, it is permitted for a person to depart from the truth in a matter that will bring peace. As it is stated, your father commanded before he died, saying, so you shall say to Joseph, peace, please pardon your brothers, right? Jacob never issued this command, but his sons falsely attributed this statement to him in order to preserve peace between them and Joseph. Rabbi Natan says it is a mitzvah to depart from the truth in order to preserve peace. As it is stated, and Samuel said, how can I go? And Saul will hear and kill me. I'm actually going to stop right there. There's a little bit more to this text. But this idea that Joseph at the end, he realized that being deceptive wasn't helpful. And so what did he do? He went in the opposite direction and he told only the truth. But he never learned that sometimes truth still isn't all that helpful, right? He never figured out this piece. But in his name, the legacy that the other brothers gave was that they came to understand this. They came to recognize that truth by itself isn't what's important. Truth needs to be contextual. And so in Jacob's name, they lied in order to preserve the most important thing to Jacob, which is that the brothers could actually find peace. And I think that that is one of the most powerful moments in our Torah portion.
Rabbi Cassi, do you remember what I said earlier? That you have to judge telling the truth is not always the right thing. That, remember I used the words for the greater good?
Yeah.
That's exactly what I meant.
Yeah. It's such a beautiful kind of reminder here, but it's something that Jacob was working through, and he never got there, but his sons did.
So
We always hope. Yeah.
So his sons had to lie for themselves. Who the sons lying for?
They were lying in order to preserve some peace between themselves and Joseph. They were afraid that Joseph was going to retaliate. They heard all these words of truth from Jacob. Jacob dies. Joseph could have used this as an opportunity to retaliate against them. And so they say, no, but the most important thing our father wanted was for us to have peace. Jacob had said no such thing, but it was a value that Jacob had, and so they lied in order to preserve that peace.
But they're misjudging their brother. The brother's gone to all kinds of extreme to say, I don't have any grudge. Some good came out of all this. So
that's true.
why
That
do
is absolutely true, Larry. But there's another element here that is just as important, which is that Joseph also needed to learn the value of truth versus kind of humility. And when the brothers were able to vocalize this and demonstrate their understanding that relationship was more important than truth or deception, then Joseph was able to connect to them, not because he was before going to hurt them, but because he saw some growth in them that Jacob had never achieved.
Thank you.
So I want to just end here and then I'll shut this down so we could just chat amongst ourselves. But this last piece from the Torah commentary that we read for today, where he says, Musar has always emphasized honesty and truth-telling as an essential midah. Falsehood and deception should play no part in our relationships. But there is a further dimension, and this gets to what you were saying, Sari. There is a further dimension to this midah that we regularly encounter. How often do we pause to consider how we share the truth and the consequences that our words may have on those who love and respect and who are part of the fabric of our lives? Are we too quick to share? Should we rather consider being silent, not hitting the send button? Will our words cause more pain than the situation itself? Training ourselves to pause and reflect before talking in any form is part of the discipline that being honest requires.
Yeah, when I read that, I said, yes, that's the way it should be.
But by withholding the truth, it just bothers me a little bit, because by withholding the truth in a conversation with others, like relatives and whatever, because we're fearing that it might bother or hurt them, isn't that prejudging them in their ability to ultimately to change in their own lives to accept what the truth really is, rather than the deception of the truth to keep peace? I mean, if we judge, we're not supposed to judge others, but I understand the idea of saying it in a kind way, yes. But if there is a situation that requires telling the truth, as what I said before, it's not, maybe the other person has to I think Sandy was getting into this, that to learn and to grow and to change. And we shouldn't judge another person that they're just stuck at a certain point in their lives, but because we aren't ourselves. Well, we should.
So I mean, it's this balance, right? We don't want to shy away from telling the truth because that is needed.
Right.
But at the same time, we don't want to tell truth in such a way that it only causes damage. Barbara and then Sandy.
I was just thinking that in that last section, it said, stop and think before you press the send button. And, we all send messages, and it just drives me crazy because I just take a lot of time before I send a message and think about it, because you can really hurt people if you don't think carefully before you push the send button.
Yeah, thank you, Barbara.
Not everyone is really ready to hear the whole truth at once. And that's where we have to be very careful. And it reminds me, and I'm not sure of the whole story, but where there were 3 rabbis and they went into a cave and there was a light that shined, and only one of them came back and out sane, because they couldn't take all of that truth and light at once.
Yeah, beautiful mystical teaching there that we absolutely can dive into another time. Absolutely. I'm looking at the time and it is 1:30 already. This hour has flown by, and as always, it is such a delight to learn from and with all of you. Next week, we are going to be diving into the book of Exodus. We are starting our whole story about Moses and all of the exile in Egypt. And so I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you.
Thank you.
Chazak, chazak, v'nei
Yes.
chazek, right? May we
Chazak, v'nei chazek.
continue to strengthen one another.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, so
Thank
good
you.
being with you all.
Thank you.